Welcome to the Book Show, a celebration of reading and writers. I'm Joe Donahue. From the author of Skippy Dies comes Paul Murray's The Bee Sting, a funny, wise, and thought-provoking novel about family, fortune, and the struggle to be a good person when the world is falling apart. Paul Murray is the author of 3 novels, including An Evening of Long Goodbyes, The Mark and the Void, and Skippy Dies, which was longlisted for the Booker Prize and was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Again, the new novel is The Bee Sting. It is a great pleasure to welcome Paul Murray to this week's book show. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, Joe. Thanks for having me.
It's really nice to have you on the program. I have been talking about this book on our various programs for the past year, half a year, and just proclaiming this as perhaps one of the greatest books that I've ever read, and certainly the best book of the year. It is an incredible accomplishment. I think anytime a writer can write 650 pages and have a reader say, "Oh God, I wish there was more," is quite an accomplishment. And I just want to first thank you for writing such an incredible novel. I'm also interested in what it was like for you to write this, because it is such a roller coaster and it's such an emotional piece of what kind of toll that takes on you as a writer as you work your way through it.
First of all, that's wonderful to hear that. I'm so happy connected with it like that. I guess it started off as something quite different. Like I was trying to write, believe it or not, a short romantic comedy that was going to be set in Dublin. Cass was one of the characters. She was a sort of a girl from the Midlands in Ireland who goes to Trinity College and meets a South Dublin boy. But when I started writing it, I found very quickly, like within a couple of pages, that I didn't want to write a romantic comedy. I wasn't feeling comedic at that point in time. It was the end of 2017. There was a lot of pretty dark things happening in the world. And so I found myself writing Cass's backstory instead. So where did she come from? How did she get to Trinity? Like what was this town in the Midlands of Ireland like? And as soon as I did that, like having kind of labored with this romantic comedy that I just didn't want to write, as soon as I kind of started writing her story in this little town, everything just kind of exploded in this really exciting way. Like when you start a book, you're in the dark for a long time. You're in the dark for like a lot of your writing life, frankly. But one of the only ways you can tell if something's working or not is if it generates new ideas. And as soon as I kind of started, like exploring this character's life, all these other ideas just started coming to me, relating to her family and to the town and to things that I was thinking about in my own life and worrying about in my own life. Just being a parent, all the terrifying sort of things that are happening kind of geopolitically at present. Um, and like in terms of taking a toll, like it's a pretty like it's a dark book. There's a lot of the family has a lot of trauma, a lot of sadness that they're not dealing with. Um, I don't know. I don't know that I felt sort of traumatized or sad. Like, I mean, the scenes would move me if they're supposed to be moving. I felt like they were working certain on me. But I guess, if you're working as a writer, you've got to, your job is to go in, and do your sort of your 4 or 5 hours, whatever it is, and then close the door and go home and be a normal person. So I don't know that it took it all. I mean, you'd have to ask my family. Quite possible
Yes.
that I was crankier than usual when I was writing it. Like I don't know.
Well, you were quoted as saying, "I just dumped all my sadness into the book," and so you're able to do that and still at the end of the day get up and say, "Okay, that's that, and now let's go on with my life for a moment."
Writing is such a strange job because you're on your own all the time. So the book that you're reading now, like I began working that like 5 or 6 years ago. So there wasn't anybody I could tell about how it was going, or for what it felt like to write it. I don't think anyone's asked me this before, so it's why I'm kind of reaching. But I don't think you sort of ask yourself those things. You don't ask yourself, is this material making me sad or making me depressed? Or is it sort of cathartic for me? You're just telling a story. Like I was just going in there, I found this voice that I was kind of captivated by. And I just wanted to tell her story. And then that led into the rest of the family's stories. Um, but like, yeah, I did, like I say, it kind of, one of the reasons the book was exciting for me to write was that it did provide like a venue for me to kind of explore these issues that I am interested in, um, but I'm also massively, worried by, such as, the rise of fascism, or like the hypnotic power of phones, or the
Right.
amoral, oligarchy of, tech, or whatever it might be. Like all of those things found their way into the book. Um, and yeah, I guess like I don't know if you're always dumping your sadness into it. Like maybe that's not like the most elegant way of describing the writing process. But guess yeah, you're always like if anything that's alive, I guess you're tapping into stuff that's pretty deep inside you and that you can't really articulate any other way. So it's cheaper
The
than therapy, I guess.
the other thing too is that it's such an emotional book for the reader. It goes in a blink, and it just seems as we get to so many layers and so many crevices of the story, and find out so much about this family. There is such an emotional core to it. To think about creating that seems to me to be daunting. There are many ghosts that are running around here that you seem to be familiar with and want to introduce us to.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing about Ireland is that, historically we've been pretty bad about dealing with trauma. Instead, like much of Ireland's cultural history is about, finding ways to avoid dealing with things and how to kind of divert ourselves and distract ourselves and divert other people and distract other people from the things we don't want to talk about and don't want to think about. So there's a lot of like pretty dark, repressed history, in everybody's family here, I think. And this family, the Barnes family that the book is about, is kind of a case in point. So we learn that like there's a death from a couple of decades before that the parents of this family like have not really faced up to. And instead they've buried us. It's a wealthy family, so they've been able to kind of bury it under just their status and various whatever consumer goods that they're able to kind of to get hold of. But it comes back. The thing about the past is that it just keeps coming back in increasingly kind of difficult, unpleasant forms. And unbeknownst to the parents, like this, the kids who have no idea about this kind of passage in their parents' lives, the kids' lives, nevertheless, are being kind of driven by this trauma that like no one ever talks about. So that I don't know if I mean, to me, that feels like a specifically Irish thing. It seems like something that, that's like Irish people talk a lot. It's a very kind of it's a storytelling kind of a
Right.
culture here. But a lot of the talking and a lot of the storytelling, like I say, leads away from things that we don't want to talk about. But maybe that's I don't know. Maybe every culture is like that. I don't know. But for me, that was like that was real. That was really kind of an engine of the story. Just the fact that you can bury things all you want, but it just doesn't work. It'll work for a little while, and then it'll stop working. And when it stops working, things will be bad.
Given how this book has been received and the awards and the nominations and the platform that it has put the book and you on, seems to indicate that there is a universal nature to it, that it is striking a chord with audiences around the world for many of those reasons, because I think so many of us feel that way, that there's just so much going on, of whether it's Trump or Brexit or climate change, COVID. There are all of these things that we're dealing with. To have that seen through the eyes of a family, that there is a universal nature to it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the dad in the family. So I relate to each of the characters in the book in different ways, but the dad, when I became like a father, like it's a real kind of game changer in how you see the world because I don't mind so much what happens to me, but I worry a lot about what happens to my son, to my family. So the dad in the book has this fantasy that he can he can create a kind of purity. Like he gets into prepping in sort of a kind of a jokey way at first, or sort of an accidental way. He gets into kind of into prepping, but it turns into this very serious project to protect his family from the world. He thinks that he wants to secede from the world. He sees the world as a hostile place, and um, the only kind of sane kind of object, or the only sort of sane way of dealing with it, is to retreat from it. And like that's the way a lot of us, maybe not to that extent of actually kind of going to live in a forest, but it's the way a lot of us kind of the reflex reaction is to the things that you've mentioned there, like Trump or Bolsonaro or
Mm.
climate change. They're so big, and we feel so powerless that we just want to flee. And so each of the characters is trying to flee in their own way, um, be it into an affair, or be it into a video game, or be it into like a phone. And that's what, as the world gets scarier, that's what so many of us do. We just flee into our tech and try and divert ourselves with fantasies of one kind or another. But like I say, it just doesn't work, because at the back of your mind, the fear is always there. And one of the reasons, I don't know, I mean, like I said, climate change is something I'm interested in all kinds of ways. But one of the ways it fascinates me most is just that it's so huge, and yet it still seems like this niche issue. Like it still seems like something that we're just unable to process
Right.
or deal with, because we feel powerless. It's just this massive thing that, as individuals, we're all kind of made to feel guilty for, but at the same time, none of us feel we have any kind of power to address. So what do? You just ignore it, and you just turn up the stereo and just keep doing exactly what you're doing, and just hope against hope that it's going to go away. And that's the worst possible thing, obviously, as a civilization that we can do, because it's not going to go away.
Paul Murray is our guest. The new novel is The Bee Sting. You were talking about the father, Dickie, who is a father and a businessman. And you say at one point that nobody even seemed to remember the old Dickie, and then you talk about this new man. You say, yet sleepwalking was possible now as it had never seemed before. The world was made with this kind of life in mind, he came to realize. The world was a machine designed to sustain and perpetuate this kind of life, adult life, normal life. It wasn't like college when every moment bristled with pathways, alternatives, strangers, and confusion. Everything was linear, everything made sense. The future appeared before him like a railway track, moment by moment, day by day, carrying him onwards without his needing to do a thing. I thought that was a beautiful sentence because, oh man, for many of us, that is often what life feels like.
I guess Dickie's at a point in his life where he's starting to become aware of the path that he's taken. There's a point in his life when things could have gone very differently, and when he feels like he could have been a more authentic person. And that idea terrified him. Like when I talk about escape, and I mentioned all these things that the characters are trying to escape from. They're trying to escape from, climate change or fears of fascism, whatever it might be. They're really trying to escape themselves more than anything. Each member of the family is very unhappy with themselves. They don't really, they're not able to love themselves at all. And that leads them down very dark paths, because each of them is trying to become someone else. And of course, that's impossible. Dickie's a very clever guy, and he's managed very skillfully to create this new life for himself. He had this opportunity to stay in Dublin, and he was in college. He was at Trinity College, and New Vistas were kind of, having come from this small town, this kind of pretty staid. Benighted is maybe too strong, but like a very conservative town. He had this opportunity to like to see the world and live a much richer life, and he backed away from it. And he's kind of, he wants to be a good person, sort of capital G good person. He wants to be seen as a good person in the eyes of the town. He wants to be kind of a generic person in some ways. Um, and so he takes over this business that he's never had any interest in. He's not especially good at it. But when the economy is working, the car business sort of basically runs itself, and he's able to kind of like he is able to sleepwalk. He's a nice man. He's active in the town. He gives to charities and so forth. But he is kind of he's living this lie. And I was really interested in this idea that like as you get older, and particularly when you well, I guess again to come back to when I became a parent, you have this new role, and the new role is when you're a writer, you kind of have these romantic fantasies of yourself as like, like an outlaw or like a marginal figure or something like that. And but when I had a family, when I had a son, I found myself kind of sucked back into the establishment. Like you've got to go to parent teacher meetings, you've got to go to the doctor to make sure that that everything's up to date.
Right.
You've got to be sort of a solid citizen in the eyes of the world. And for your kid, you have to be the arbiter of right and wrong. And you have to say things like, well, you should never eat paste, and you should always pay attention to your teacher, and you should always do this and always do that. All of these things that you would have scorned, a few years before, now you're kind of you find yourself kind of delivering the party line. And on the one hand, that's a little bit alarming. But on the other hand, you kind of realize that there is this role that you can inhabit. And it's easier. It's easier to inhabit that role of the dad, the dad who's got the job and he drops the kid to school and then he goes off to work and then he comes home and he stops at the supermarket on the way back. And like all that path is there for you in a way that like sort of that other paths aren't. And like so what Dickie's feeling there, like I think that's kind of true, for everybody. And it's in some ways it's a function of middle age because when you're young, all of these choices are before you, and every choice you make closes another door, till you get to the point that you realize, you're kind of stuck, like there's no way I can turn around now and say I'm going to become like a professional basketball player or like a lawyer or anything like that. It's kind of too late for a lot of those things. So Dickie's got this. He's realized that, but he's not accepting it. So he goes down. Like each of the characters tries to escape, and each of the routes they take is fraught with peril and worse than what they're trying to escape from. But even though Dickie's a clever guy, he's probably like at the worst idea of all, which is that he basically tries to retrieve his past. He tries to go back into the past and get back to the person he was when he was 20, and everything bristled with strangers and confusion. And I can understand that temptation, but also it's just something that's never going to work out.
You write in one line, it was his if whatever confidence he might have gained in those 20 years, whatever sureness of himself or sense of himself as a man had suddenly blown away in the breeze, a suit of armor made of dandelion clocks. And it blows away.
Well, yeah, that's it. It's just he's kind of he does he's I mean, I guess, to compensate you for growing older, like society does equip you with these roles and this status. And, unless things go drastically wrong, you have more money, when you're middle-aged than you do when you're a teenager or when you're in college. And you have this comfort and this sort of security and this sense of yourself that can be sedative. And Dickie, I admire his I don't admire his courage. He's a very foolish person, and he really jeopardizes his family in pursuing this fantasy. And he really jeopardizes himself as well. Because when all that armor blows away in that the line you quoted, like the dandelion clocks, he exposes himself. And I guess each of the characters in the book, there are kind of dangerous people around them. There are seductive people around them. Some of them are, they're people that they know. Some of them are speaking to them from the phone and may not be who they seem to be. They're all offering these new lives, these different lives. This idea that we're constantly being sold that you're only one step away from a new identity that will be easier and will be better and truer. And this thought that you can just shed your past and walk away from it into this kind of better, more authentic self. That's I guess what the book is about is this conflict between the past and the present, and the fact that you're chained to your past. You can't walk away from it. You've got to find some way to come to terms with it and use it that will work for you. and Dickie's tragedy, which ends up being the kind of the tragedy of the family because of what he kind of unwittingly leads into. He's not able to do that. He's not. His wife is able to, and the kids too. They're able to come to terms with themselves and find a way to be in the world that is that feels okay, where they can feel okay about themselves and they can kind of relate to other people as themselves and not have to hide. But Dickie's so embedded in this lie, and this it's an attractive lie because he's all about being a good person, and we
Hmm.
all want to be good people. Um, and he's so good at acting, he's just not able to pull himself out. He's not able to kind of show the world his real self, and that's what leads to his downfall.
The book is sneaky because you're reading so far into it, and then all of a sudden at the end, there is this propulsion that takes over that brings you very quickly into the lives of Dickie and Cass and PJ and Imelda and brings their story. And it is such a page turner at that point and a thriller as to what happens because we're looking to see how this winds up. And all of these threads are suddenly coming together. I'm curious as to what that was like to write for you, and because it is at such a rapid torrent of a pace, does that come out of you more quickly, or is it still the daunting part of what it was like to get you there, that you're very careful in how you address the last stages of how we leave these characters?
Yeah, so each section, each member of the family narrates a different part of the book. So Cass narrates the first part, and then PJ, her little brother, then Imelda, the mom, and Dickie, the dad. And I was really invested in each of those voices, and they were all, I could sort of hear them in my head, and it was really exciting to kind of to inhabit those characters. And but I wasn't sure what I would do for the last section, like how it kind of tie all those different strands together, like you say. So the way it works is that it basically flips from character to character, back and forth, and they're each speaking in the second person. It's which is the you voice, which I've always found has this mysterious power. Like it's just I don't really quite know why, but I've used it a few times, and it's just got this when you hear like this someone speaking in this you. So you're sitting in a seat in the college lecture hall, and Elaine sitting beside you, and you're hungry, but you don't really feel like eating, and it's weirdly hypnotic, and it's got the strange authenticity that for some reason the first person, the I voice, doesn't have. So one of the things I found I could do with that. So if each of the characters is speaking in this you voice, you flip back and forth between their sections, and you find that there's a kind of a things are chiming between these characters. So they're in different places for some of that section, but they're kind of experiencing the same thing and they're having the same emotions. And then towards the end of the book, like you say, they're drawn back to the house. The house where they live is just outside the town, and it's got a forest behind it, which is part of their land, and that's where Dickie's been prepping. And there's a storm. It's very dramatic. It's nighttime, and Dickie's out there with this sort of sinister henchman that he's building his shelter with, and the kids are trying to find their way through the forest, and Imelda's trying to find Dickie. And the sections get shorter and shorter, and it was it was exciting to write. Like I watch a lot of movies, and I guess like the editing of that section was sort of you can see sort of the cinematic
Yes.
influences there. When you talk about did it come out quicker, like really a technically very difficult section to write. Like there's a massive amount of prep for each of the sections, but the last few pages, oh man, there's so many pages and pages of notes. Just trying to get that section right. It was like really really difficult. It's all about just writing it right and getting the sound of the words right and the rhythm of the voices right, to keep it driving forward, and trying to keep it short, but also trying to fit in all the things that the characters are remembering and they're feeling at the time. So I'm delighted that it worked for you. Like it took a long time.
So, Paul, let's talk about the ending without talking about the ending, which I found it to be such a beautiful and satisfying way to end this. I can see where people would sort of wonder as to how they interpret the the ending. I guess the best I can do without giving anything away is to ask the question of what was your hope that when people close the book that of what they're left with.
To me, it's pretty clear what happens at the end, and everything in the book has been leading to that moment from first sentence. You're always writing with to the best reader you can have. Like, I certainly didn't want to patronize the reader, and and kind of it was kind of tempting to kind of clarify what happens. It was also tempting to put in epilogues where there'd be silver linings or something like that. But I really felt like that this was the ending that the book had to have. Uh, and I was just writing it down. That sounds, I don't know, I try not to like mystify the process at all. But it really felt like that was the ending that was kind of being dictated to me, that was the natural ending for the book. So in terms of what the reader takes away, there's a lot of stuff about there's a sense of fate to the book. I think like I love film noir, and I think this book is pretty noirish in that each of the characters is um, they're fully fleshed out, and they're certainly not puppets to the plot in any regard, but each of them is kind of locked in to something that's much bigger than them, and that they make their own decisions, but at the same time they only seem to go deeper into this kind of machine that they're trapped inside.
It is an amazing novel, The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. It is published by FSG. Paul, thank you so much for being with us and for so beautifully articulating your craft.
Oh, thanks so much, Joe. Real pleasure for me.
Thanks to our producer, Sarah LeDuc. Write to us at book@wamc.org. The latest on National Productions programs is available via the Airwaves newsletter at wamc.org or on social media at WAMC Radio. Bookmark us for next week, and thanks for listening. For The Book Show, I'm Joe Donahue.